Asia is changing fast, but not always for the better. Some countries are drowning in debt, political chaos, and environmental disasters. Will they survive, or are they heading toward total collapse? Stay tuned to find out. Before we begin, like, comment, and subscribe. If you live in one of these countries, let me know your experience in the comments. Let's get started. Number 10, Pakistan. Pakistan is trapped in a never-ending crisis, and the situation keeps getting worse. The economy is falling apart. With over $120 billion in debt and massive budget deficits, the country is on the edge of bankruptcy. Inflation is skyrocketing past 30% in 2024, pushing millions into poverty. The government keeps turning to the IMF for bailouts, but instead of fixing the real problems, it's only making Pakistan more dependent and stuck in a never-ending financial trap. Political chaos is tearing the country apart. The removal of former Prime Minister Imran Khan has thrown Pakistan into deep political turmoil. Corruption scandals and weak leadership have shattered public trust in the government. Even the military, which has always controlled much of Pakistan's politics, is losing support as people grow frustrated with its interference and failed leadership. Security is collapsing. The rise of the Tehrik-i Taliban Pakistan and growing tensions with India over Kashmir are fueling violence. Terrorist attacks, cross-border clashes, and deep divisions between sectarian and ethnic groups are stretching Pakistan's already limited resources to the breaking point. Nature is making things even worse. Pakistan is one of the most climate-vulnerable countries in the world. The devastating floods of 2022 left millions homeless, and the country is still struggling to recover. With frequent natural disasters, water shortages, and declining farm production, food insecurity is rising, making life even harder for millions of Pakistanis. Number 9, Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka's economy crashed in 2022, marking its first ever default and sending the country into chaos. Even with a $2.9 billion IMF bailout, the road to recovery is full of obstacles. The government is drowning in debt over 120% of GDP, making progress nearly impossible. On top of that, strict policies from international lenders are fueling anger among the people, adding to the nation's struggles. Politics remains a mess. The fall of the Rajapaksa family in 2022 brought hope, but that hope quickly faded. Corruption, power struggles, and poor leadership continue to block real change. New governments have failed to fix the deep-rooted problems, leaving the country stuck in instability. The people are furious. The economic collapse has destroyed public trust, and unemployment and inflation have left many struggling to survive. Protests are erupting as citizens demand justice and accountability. Ethnic tensions between Muslims, Tamils, and Sinhalese are adding to the unrest, threatening national unity. Tourism, once a major source of income, is still in crisis. The industry hasn't fully recovered from the COVID-19 pandemic and the devastating 2019 Easter Sunday attacks. Meanwhile, environmental destruction, coastal erosion, deforestation, and resource depletion is making things even worse, further weakening Sri Lanka's chances of a sustainable recovery. Number 8, Bhutan. Bhutan is struggling in silence. Crisis isn't about politics, it's about money. The country's economy leans heavily on hydropower exports to India, making up over 20% of its GDP. But with falling demand and project delays, revenue has plummeted. On top of that, Bhutan's tourism industry, a key source of foreign cash, still hasn't bounced back from the COVID-19 collapse. Debt is spiraling out of control. Bhutan's foreign debt has exploded to over 120% of its GDP, mostly due to massive loans for hydropower projects. This crushing burden is choking the government's ability to invest in healthcare, education, and other essentials. Bhutan's heavy reliance on Indian financial support also makes it vulnerable to outside pressure. The population is shrinking. A declining birth rate and a wave of young people leaving for better opportunities abroad have left Bhutan with a rapidly aging population. This shift is threatening the future workforce and putting extra strain on social support systems. nature is fighting back. Bhutan may be one of the world's only carbon-negative countries, but it's still at risk. Climate change is causing unpredictable weather and melting glaciers, endangering both agriculture and hydropower, the backbone of the economy. Bhutan's deep dependence on nature makes it extremely vulnerable to environmental shocks. Number 7. Myanmar. Myanmar is falling apart. The military's takeover in February 2021, which removed Aung San Suu Kyi-elected government, threw the country into chaos. Since then, Myanmar has been drowning in violence, brutal crackdowns, mass protests, and all-out civil war. The military's failure to govern has left large parts of the country in the hands of pro-democracy fighters and ethnic armed groups, creating a nation in total disarray. The economy is collapsing. International sanctions and foreign investors pulling out have crippled key industries like agriculture and manufacturing. The Myanmar kyat has crashed in value, leading to skyrocketing inflation and extreme poverty. Over 40% of the population is now struggling just to survive. A massive humanitarian crisis is unfolding. More than 2 million people have been forced to flee their homes, with many living in horrible conditions in refugee camps. There's little access to food, clean water, or medical care. The military's restrictions on aid have made things even worse, and the UN is warning that famine could be next. Myanmar is cut off from the world. Western nations have hit the country with sanctions, while even powerful neighbors like China and India have failed to bring stability. With no united international effort to stop the crisis, the military remains in control, dragging the country deeper into disaster. Number 6. China. For years, China seemed unstoppable, rising as a global economic superpower. But now, cracks are appearing, and the illusion of strength is fading fast. The economy is in trouble, and the housing market is in chaos. China's real estate industry, once a major growth driver, is collapsing. Giant developers like Evergrande and Country Garden have failed to pay their debts, leaving millions of homeowners and investors in panic. The government has tried to stop the crisis with bailouts and policy changes, but nothing is working. At the same time, local governments have borrowed too much for massive infrastructure projects, and now they're drowning in debt, creating a financial disaster across the country. China's population is shrinking. In 2022, for the first time in 60 years, China's population started to decline, and it's only getting worse. Decades of the one-child policy have left behind an aging workforce and fewer young people to support the economy. With fewer workers and consumers, the country's economic strength is weakening fast. Political chaos and extreme control. President Xi Jinping has taken full control, but his strict policies are backfiring. Harsh zero-COVID lockdowns, crackdowns on businesses, and total government control have created fear and uncertainty. In late 2022, mass protests erupted, exposing the growing frustration of the people. As the economy worsens, social unrest could explode again, threatening the Communist Party's grip on power. China is pushing away the world. Its aggressive actions and territorial disputes, especially in the South China Sea and Taiwan, have angered other countries. The US and EU have hit back with sanctions and trade restrictions, cutting China off from key global markets. If this isolation continues, China's economy, heavily dependent on manufacturing, could face a total meltdown. Number 5. Lebanon. Lebanon is collapsing fast. The World Bank has called its economic meltdown one of the worst in modern history, and there's no sign of recovery. Since 2019, the Lebanese pound has lost over 98% of its value, wiping out savings and plunging millions into extreme poverty. Prices of basic necessities have skyrocketed, making daily survival a struggle. The banking system is in ruins. People can't access their own money, and corruption has shattered all trust in the government. With no clear plan to fix the crisis, Lebanon is stuck in an endless downward spiral. Politics are frozen. Lebanon's government is built on a sectarian power-sharing system, but it has completely failed. Leaders can't agree on anything, and the country has been without a president. People are furious, protests and strikes are happening everywhere. Iran-backed Hezbollah has taken control of much of the political scene, making things even worse. International donors have offered financial aid, but only if Lebanon makes real reforms. So far, the corrupt elites refuse to change, keeping the country trapped in chaos. A massive humanitarian disaster. Lebanon is struggling to support its own people, yet it also hosts over 1.5 million Syrian refugees, stretching its resources to the breaking point. Water, electricity, and hospitals are barely functioning. A deadly cholera outbreak has exposed how weak the country's healthcare system has become. Lebanon's collapse is shaking the whole region. Its location in the Middle East makes it a key player in regional politics, but its instability is now a huge risk. The chaos in Lebanon could make tensions in Israel, Syria, and other neighboring countries even worse, pushing the region closer to conflict. Number 4. Afghanistan. Afghanistan is trapped in total chaos. Since the Taliban took over in August 2021, the economy has crumbled. Foreign aid, which once made up over 70% of the national budget, has vanished, leaving the country in financial disaster. According to the UN, millions face extreme hunger, and over 90% of Afghans live in crushing poverty. The Taliban's failure to build a working economy has made things worse. Foreign investors have fled, banks are barely functioning, and strict cash withdrawal limits have left people struggling to survive. A humanitarian nightmare. Afghanistan is facing one of the worst crises in the world. More than 28 million people, over 2/3 of the population, desperately need aid. Long droughts and climate change have destroyed crops, making food even scarcer. Hospitals are collapsing due to a lack of doctors, medicine, and basic supplies. On top of that, the Taliban's harsh rules have forced women and girls out of schools and jobs, crippling the country's future. Violence is out of control. The Taliban claimed they would bring peace, but the reality is far from it. Internal power struggles and the growing threat of Islamic State Khorasan have made the country even more dangerous. Bombings and attacks on civilians are common, creating constant fear and instability. Afghanistan is cut off from the world. No country officially recognizes the Taliban government, leaving Afghanistan more isolated than ever. Sanctions and frozen assets have crushed any chance of recovery. Without international help, Afghanistan risks becoming a breeding ground for terrorism, increasing global security fears. Number 3. Bangladesh. Bangladesh is on the edge of disaster. The country's economy and environment are both in serious danger. Over 80% of Bangladesh's exports come from the garment industry, but demand is dropping fast as economies in Europe and North America slow down. At the same time, competition from Vietnam and Cambodia is making things even harder. Production costs are rising, and small businesses, the backbone of the economy, are struggling because they can't get affordable loans. Inflation was around 9% in late 2024, making life more expensive for millions of people. To make matters worse, the value of the taka has dropped, making imports cost even more. The government is in crisis. Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's Awami League is facing huge pressure. People are furious over corruption, rigged elections, and the government's crackdown on opposition voices. Protests are breaking out everywhere, and political chaos is growing. The country's broken bureaucracy and weak legal system have made it impossible to bring real change. Climate change is an unstoppable disaster. Bangladesh is one of the most vulnerable countries in the world. Rising sea levels could swallow huge parts of the country, forcing millions to flee. Deadly floods, storms, and erosion are destroying farmland, making food shortages worse. The government's response, building embankments and promoting climate-resistant crops, is not nearly enough to handle the crisis. People are desperate. Economic struggles and climate disasters are forcing many to leave their homes. Protests over inflation, job losses, and poor disaster relief are becoming common. Many Bangladeshis are trying to escape the country in search of a better life, leading to a rise in illegal migration. Neighboring India has tightened its borders, creating even more tension between the two countries. Number 2. Laos. Laos is drowning in debt. The country borrowed heavily to fund massive infrastructure projects, especially under China's Belt and Road Initiative. By 2024, its debt had skyrocketed to over 100% of its GDP, with most of it owed to China. Corruption, reckless spending, and over-reliance on hydropower exports have made things worse. But now, Laos's biggest energy buyers, Thailand and Vietnam, are cutting back on imports, leaving the country with less foreign income and an even bigger financial crisis. The currency is collapsing. Since 2023, the Lao kip has lost over 40% of its value against the US dollar. This has made imports more expensive, driving inflation to a shocking 25%. Food and fuel prices are out of control, pushing more and more people into poverty. Everyday life has become a struggle as wages fail to keep up with skyrocketing costs. Nature is paying the price, too. Laos depends heavily on hydropower, but its dam projects have caused massive environmental damage. River ecosystems are being destroyed, fish populations are shrinking, and entire communities have been forced from their homes. On top of that, deforestation and soil degradation are making it harder for farmers to grow crops, threatening the country's food supply. The people are angry, but the government won't listen. The ruling Lao People's Revolutionary Party is under fire for failing to fix the crisis. Instead of addressing the problems, they are silencing critics with censorship, surveillance, and harsh crackdowns on protests. Corruption and secrecy have shattered public trust, but frustration continues to build. Number 1. The Maldives. The Maldives is living on the edge. This paradise is one of the most endangered places on Earth due to climate change. With 80% of its 1,200 islands sitting less than a meter above sea level, rising oceans pose a life-threatening risk. Scientists warn that by 2050, many islands could become unlivable or even disappear completely. Extreme weather like cyclones, storm surges, and coral bleaching is already damaging tourism and fishing, the two biggest sources of income. Meanwhile, rising sea temperatures and ocean acidification are destroying coral reefs, which are vital to the country's marine life and economy. The economy is hanging by a thread. Tourism makes up more than 30% of the Maldives' GDP and employs a huge part of the population. But visitor numbers are dropping due to environmental damage and global economic instability. The COVID-19 crisis exposed just how risky this dependence on tourism is. Recovery has been slow, and the cost of maintaining infrastructure across so many scattered islands is draining the budget. By 2024, the country's debt is expected to exceed 100% of GDP, forcing the Maldives to rely heavily on foreign loans. The burden of repaying this debt is limiting funds for social programs and climate adaptation efforts. Political chaos is making things worse. Instability has been a part of Maldivian history, with governments struggling to balance economic growth and environmental protection. Corruption, nepotism, and human rights abuses have shattered public trust. At the same time, global powers, especially China and India, are competing for influence in the country, adding to its political struggles. And there you have it, 10 Asian countries on the brink of collapse. The future is uncertain, and these nations are struggling to survive. Will they recover, or will they fall deeper into crisis? Only time will tell. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.